And joining us now is Ratna Omidvar, the Executive Director of the Maitrey Foundation and the Executive Director of the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council. Welcome to TVO, Ratna. It's good to see you again.
Thank you, Steve.
Without further ado, let us show the ad that I suspect many of our viewers have had a chance to look at, which sums up a lot of what you're in business to try to tackle. Roll tape, please, Michael.
So this says you went to Tehran University?
Tehran University, yes, I did.
Okay, and you graduated with a master's degree.
Master's in mechanical engineering.
Right. And then you were a senior engineer at Barami and Maga?
Muqaddam.
Well, this is a great resume.
Thank you.
So can you work a softy machine?
Very powerful ads on hiring immigrants. Here are some of the numbers, which immigrants are all too well aware of in this country. 72% of immigrants to Ontario have a university degree. 6 out of 10 make a downwardly mobile career or job shift when they get here. Although most immigrants find a job within 6 months, fully 55% do not work in their intended profession. And immigrants' rate of employment in Canada after 2 years is 69%. That's 12% lower than the general population. Let's start with this question, Ratna. Why do you think employers apparently are so reluctant to hire immigrants?
Well, there are a whole number of documented reasons, but I'll try and summarize it. Employers are worried about risk. What they don't know, they don't want to take a risk on. It reflects on their bottom line. And the work I do is dedicated to helping employers mitigate their risk in different ways. And we put out solutions and ideas for them to learn from each other and from other ideas that we have so that they can, in fact, take a risk that's well warranted.
How much of it is, this person doesn't look or sound like me or come from where I came from, and therefore I'm not sure about that?
I think it's maybe a little bit of that, but it's mostly about credentials, about educational institutions in far-off places where there is no link back to Canada. There are some institutions that may have a good reputation in Canada, primarily, let's say, from countries in Europe or the United Kingdom. But when you have major source countries such as China, India, Brazil, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, then people tend to, and they're busy. I've talked with employers. I actually don't believe that most employers are deliberately racist or exclusionary. They're just really busy people, and what they don't know doesn't cut it for them, so they'll put it aside.
Well, that commercial we just saw, which, you know, on the face of it is kind of humorous, but
yes,
deep down it's actually, I mean, it's very sad.
It is.
How much of that's going on right now?
As you saw the statistics, 6 of 10 are making a downwardly mobile shift.
But we hear the sort of proverbial story of the PhD driving a taxi. I mean, is that really the situation?
It's part of our urban mythology in Toronto. Get into a taxi cab and talk to the driver. I would suggest to you that at least 5 times out of 10, you're going to hit an engineer, a lawyer, or a doctor.
What kind of things should employers be doing? You talked about solutions a second ago to consider immigrants for more jobs.
Well, there are tools, and they should be looking at the tools, and they should be made aware of the tools.
Like what?
So, for example, they can go to an organization called World Education Services that's been set up by the Government of Ontario, and that will provide an employer with an educational equivalency. This person's education was so much in this country, it's worth this much of our system here. They can hire an intern and test someone out for 4 months or 6 months. They can sign up, individuals can sign up as mentors. All of these are incremental approaches to getting employers to feel a little bit more comfortable with what's coming across their desk in terms of application. Employers are also very creative, I think. The Royal Bank, for example, does not ask for place of education at the first flush of applications. And just that little single strategy has enabled them to actually look in a very constructive way at many more applications than they would have. Husky in Guelph, I believe, does not actually have a requirement for Canadian work experience, which is very interesting. They have developed a database of educational institutions from overseas that they can count on to give them the skills that they need.
Well, I've talked to employers about this too, and one of the things that I hear coming back from them to me is, how can I hire somebody whose English is lousy? What do you do about that?
You can't hire someone whose English is lousy. Their English has to improve. I know that in Ontario we've signed a major agreement with the federal government. We're going to see a much stronger effort made to provide immigrants with the language that they need, but not just language, and this has been part of our problem. We've done a lot of language training. It's mostly been about getting by in Canada. It hasn't been language training for the workplace. What do you call this widget or that widget? What's the way of writing a report, etc. And I think we're going to see some of those initiatives. But more importantly than, let's say, the actual language that you speak, I think there's an issue of communications and there's a culture gap.
Let me follow up on that, because I did hear a story today from one of our producers that was an angle on this whole story that I had not heard before. I'll try and tell it very quickly. Woman doctor decides to go on vacation. She has a colleague who is originally, I think I'm right in saying, from Iran, another female doctor who she trusts and will put in her place to see her patients while she's off on vacation. A woman doctor from Iran sees another patient who's pregnant. Woman isn't sure she wants to keep the pregnancy. Woman is a Muslim. Muslim doctor says to Muslim patient, you have no choice but to have this child. You're a Muslim. Your options are, period, full stop, have this baby. That's a tough proposal, is it not?
That's a very interesting story, and I would suggest that there are do's and don'ts. The ethics of any occupation or profession are regulated. And my question about the story would be, has this doctor taken the ethics and the professional part of the relicensing or licensing? But there are other...
But even, let me just interrupt long enough to say, even if she had, her opinion in that situation was, or her advice in that situation was, whatever I may have learned about the way to do business in this country, it's trumped by the fact that I have cultural imperatives that come from the old country that you, as my patient, also from the old country, have to follow as well. That doesn't sound like new immigrants willingly buying into the new Canada that they've come to. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I think it takes time for new immigrants to buy into the new Canada that they come into, and I definitely think that globalization, speed of information, travel, etc., it makes it so much easier to be in one country and live emotionally in another. And I think these are problems we have to face head on, otherwise we're going to see the same kinds of expressions of isolation such as we have in Great Britain and France. I don't believe we are there because, by and large, our society works sort of together, and where there are problems, you mitigate them. But I think the rise of fundamentalism, regardless of which religion, is a serious threat to multiculturalism, and we need to have some discussions on how far accommodation can go.
That's it. Yeah, let me follow up on that, because, okay, it's one thing if you can't speak the language, obviously, but if the culture gap is this wide, and you mentioned earlier at the beginning, employers don't want to take risks on things they don't understand. Well, I mean, is that not a good example of part of the, maybe the biggest part of the problem that employers are facing?
True, and the only solution to that is education on all sides. We need to make sure that immigrants understand what kind of a society they're buying into. And nowhere do we actually do that outside sort of some vague citizenship type ceremonies. But citizenship happens 3 or 4 years after you get here. We need to start proactively telling people, Canada is this kind of a society. We have to respect the rule of law, but beyond the rule of law, there's respect for women. We will not tolerate oppression of women. We will not discriminate actively against people just because they come from a certain place or have a certain creed or look a certain way. This is all part and parcel of that education. And Steve, I think that the role of our public schools is enormously valuable in this, because it's the children of immigrants who go to school who come back with the right messages and educate their parents. And I think we need to tease that up a little bit more. We need to make sure that kids in school are in fact encouraged to mix with other kids, and I'm constantly surprised that in this whole discussion on how do we make our country more multicultural, we forget the role of sport. Sports are a hugely unifying. I mean, look
contravenes any ethnicity I've ever seen.
Any ethnicity. Yeah. You put kids in a team together to play with each other. Then you get their parents to like sandwiches and hot water or whatever it is on Saturdays and Sundays. That's where you can build a nation, I would say.
Just parenthetically, I remember talking to several pro hockey players about this once. You know, there you have Czechs and Slovaks and Russians all playing on the same team, Russians and Swedes, you know, who've gone to war. And, you know, you suggest to them, don't you ever think about the fact that, you know, this guy invaded your country 50 years ago or whatever? They look at me like I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
None of that matters. They're here to win the Stanley Cup.
Yes.
Moving right along.
Okay.
The ads.
Yes.
What kind of feedback are you getting to the ads?
We're getting enormously positive feedback. People are telling, I mean, I was at a party yesterday. They were the subject of the conversation. I know high school kids are talking about them. Our website is registering 3 times as much traffic, but I won't pretend. We're also getting negative responses.
Like what?
Well, there are a few hate calls that are anonymous, but then there are the emails that we're getting. What about my son, the engineer from Waterloo? What about Canadians first? Why is it our responsibility to give immigrants high-paying jobs, which they left behind in their country? It was their choice, so let them, you know, sink or swim.
What's the answer to that question?
The answer to that question is that it's not simply in their self-interest. It's not simply in the interest of the immigrants to succeed. It is really in our national interest to make this work. If you read the statistics on population, more importantly than population, on labor market growth, then, you know, we know that who's going to be living more and more in this country, who's going to be buying more products, who's going to be serving the economy, et cetera, et cetera. And we have very clearly documented labor market shortages in certain occupations.
Let me read something that was in the National Post just today. In recent years, newcomers to Canada have brought with them a greater level of education on average than previous immigrant cohorts. Yet, their economic performance remains far below that of Canadian-born population. Why are today's highly qualified immigrants doing so poorly? The answer is obvious. We simply don't need the services of many of the skilled people coming to Canada. The jobs they hope to find here do not exist. Is that true?
Let me take that apart in a number of ways. Mr. Collicott, who writes this, states that we are bringing in more skilled immigrants than before, and they're not doing as well. The fact of the matter is that the new selection system that was put in place in 2006 is only 4 years old. And even then, there was a significant amount of grandfathering of old applicants. So we don't really know how the system has worked out. I will put that on the table. It's too early to say whether the new system is entirely not working or working to some extent. On the issue of the jobs aren't here, I would refer us to Stats Canada, which tells us that, in fact, we are going to experience significant labor market shortages. The question really is, are we satisfied with a labor market that does not grow? Can we manage that? And that, I'm not an economist, I won't go into that.
But common sense tells
me we should not be in a smaller economy.
Do you think immigrants come to this country with higher expectations than are reasonable? You know the stories about our grandparents and great-grandparents who came here with nothing and were prepared to do really lousy, hard work for a long time in order to let the next generation get along. Does that feeling still exist in immigrants today?
I think most immigrants who come to Canada come for a number of reasons. Just one of them, by the way, I believe, is a better life, a better economic life. A great part of that is our public education system, which, whether we like it, whether we think of it in this way or not, is highly touted in immigration source countries. Our safety, our security, our tolerance, our multiculturalism, all those things that make Canada look incredibly good once you're outside Canada and looking in. There's also the fact that middle-class societies in primary source countries like China and India are very successful and are growing rapidly. So people look at that and say, well, I have this standard of life, am I going to get an equivalent standard of life? So yes, there's a little bit of, I want it all, and I want it now. And that is part of speed, globalization, all of that. And there is a little bit of this instant gratification that we're all coping with.
I don't mean to get too personal with you, but you're born in another country,
yes.
right? You're from India?
Yes.
How old were you when you came here?
I was 31 when I came here.
31?
Yes.
What was your first job?
I was a secretary selling tubes and pipes, which I couldn't distinguish the difference between a tube and a pipe, so I didn't last there long. But my occupation, I think that's your question, I'm a teacher of German as a second language, and even I understood that would be pretty hard for someone in Canada to learn German from an Indian. So I was very fortunate. I found a different career path for myself. But I think that is that opportunity to do things differently is becoming more and more constricted the more we become a society of higher and higher excellence. You need X numbers of university degrees to do Y. I mean, I would never have my job today if I applied for it, let me put it this way.
Ratna Omidvar, I want to thank you very much for coming in. We're going to continue the discussion about immigration on the other side of the room, so thanks for being here tonight on TVO with us.
Thank you.